Globispan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas, and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Bobby, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Land of many waters with 6 races living together.
On television. Tonight, we have two of our most distinguished guests to talk about the budget. But before we get there, I want to let our audience know that we must give thanks to Noir Singh for making this program available, and to Devin Bissoon and Ryan Gobin, our technical producers. Now, and to all the staff members as well. Now, tonight's program is going to be strictly on the budget, the pros and cons, positive, negative aspects of the budget, whatever exists, we'll discuss it thoroughly. But I want to inform all our listeners, but the views expressed on this program are the views solely of our guests and not necessarily the management of Globespan Television. So tonight I want to welcome our viewers and our guest. Dr. Terence Blackman is the chairman of the mathematical department and associate professor at Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, New York. And I have with me here Mr. Joel Bagwadin. He's a financial analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rose. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your guests, and also with Joel. It's an absolute pleasure. So I look forward to the conversation.
Also, the two of you know each other.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Now, I'll start with you first, and I must say also Happy New Year to both of you and to all our listeners again, so that we look forward to make sure that this new year become more prosperous, beneficial to Guyana and the world at large. Now, Mr. Bagwandin, I want to start with you first. As you know, no budget is perfect. No budget in the world can meet the needs of every single individual in a country or groups of individuals. It will have its negative and positive connotations. What, in your opinion, are some of the positive aspects of this budget?
All right, so thank you once again for having me on this program after a long time, a long sabbatical from Globespan. I'm no stranger to Globespan's platform and audience. So first, let me say that I particularly like your opening statement in which you sought to frame the conversation. The only thing that I would change in your opening statement is one word. I would replace the word needs with expectations, because needs would always be there, but we also, or I would add the word expectation to it, more so expectation. And that is one of the biggest challenge, to manage the expectation of the population and different segments of stakeholders. Now, what are my thoughts are the positives in the budget? Let's establish some important context. And the important context is Where have we come from? Where are we today? What are the resources do we have at our disposal? When I say we, well, I mean the government. What resources does the government, or when I say we, I mean the country, and the government administers that on behalf of the people for the state? First, I want to speak to the notion of the largest budget. We have reached the $1 trillion mark. And this number, this $1 trillion, is confusing a lot of folks. And today, on the lighter side of things, I saw some members in the parliamentary debate today on the opposition side. The numbers are particularly big, so they're staying away. Instead of saying 204.1 billion, I heard somebody said 2041 billion, right? So, but I want to put that in context for the viewers to understand. Everything in life, everything in math, in economics, in policy, every aspect of life is relative. So the budget may be the largest in absolute terms, but it is among the smallest in relative terms. And I say this because there is a view that, or a perception that the budget, because it crossed the $1 trillion mark for the first time in maybe 3 decades, since 1992, it's extraordinarily
Eleanor Holder.
It is not extraordinarily large. If we look at a time series of data from back in the 90s, you would find that the size of the budget relative to GDP from 1990 up to 2005 was in the region between 60 to 50% of GDP. In 2005, thereafter, up to this point, the budget relative to the size of GDP has been in the region of 21 to 30% relative to GDP. So this budget, 2024 budget, relative to GDP based on the forecast growth for 2024 is 23%. So it's not an extraordinarily large budget, and that level of growth in the budget is consistent with the level of growth of the economy over the last 17 years, consistently, which is an indicator of sustainability and consistency. Because if you have an extraordinarily large budget and it is financed to a large extent by debt, then you expose the country, you expose the fiscal framework to debt sustainability problems, whether we'd be able to sustain the amount of borrowings to finance the budget. So to date, our debt to GDP, the debt financing in the budget is just about 37%.
Mr. Bagwandel, I just want to interrupt. We're going to come to that aspect of it later on. But the specific question I did ask is, what are some of the positive aspects of the budget?
Let me deal firstly with the allocation in the budget towards the social services sector. The allocations for the social services sector and the breakdown of that sector include education, it includes health, those are the 2 main ones. It includes social welfare or human services, that includes allocation for the pensioners and other public assistance, etc. That amount to the social services sector alone accounts for 30% of the budget. Now, the positive aspects that I would particularly highlight are the budgetary allocations towards the continuity of investment in health, education, and infrastructure. Now, a lot of persons say that infrastructure getting the large, which is correct, the largest allocation from the budget of 236 billion thereabout. But 3 years ago, I was on public record stating that when you look at the development needs of the country in infrastructure alone, and What am I speaking of the development needs in infrastructure? There's a 1996 development strategy that a lot of the development identified in that strategy were not implemented because of many challenges, which is beyond the scope of tonight's program to get into. So many of the developments in infrastructure taking place today were identified since in the 1996 document. For example, the bridge across the river, all the highways and the roads that we are now building, all the community roads, investment towards integrating connectivity to hinterland, etc. So in that context, and looking at what was implemented over the years, I came up with a number of, we need to spend about $1 billion US, which is $200 million a year on infrastructure. We need things like Deepwater Port, the road connecting Latin and Brazil to Georgetown. These are major infrastructure that were identified a long time ago, 3 decades ago, that we were not able to implement because of many constraints and many challenges. The cost to do that in today's monetary terms, in today's value for money, at least $1 billion a year. 3 years later today, from 3 years ago when I made that forecast, the allocation towards infrastructure is within that region, which is consistent with my own forecast 3 years ago. So those are what I would highlight as the positive things, particularly important in the budget: infrastructure, health and education, and the social services sector altogether.
Okay. Dr. Blackman, Mr. Bagwin mentioned a key word there, expectations. Do you think this budget reached the expectations of the people?
So let me say, it's a challenging question to answer. It's clear that there are critics of the budget, for whom the budget does not meet the sort of expectations that they had for it. But it is also clear that as Joel, and I think it's a good conversation for us to have between Joel and myself, in part because Joel is in the budget making process. I am sitting away from the budget making process, and so just looking at the budget from a high view. So I think Joel is right to highlight the areas of infrastructure, the roads and the bridges, the sea and air infrastructure, certainly the energy infrastructure, the investments being made in terms of the gas to energy project and various things of that sort. Certainly, he's right to identify these questions of, well, he didn't, but there are elements there which go to, broadly sort of housing and urban development. So these areas of focus, are clearly from far away things that I think meet the expectations of some, and broadly ought to meet the expectations of all. What one should see emerging from the infrastructure spend, and we'll talk about how to criticize the infrastructure spend in a moment, but I think it is evident that from the sort of infrastructure spend that is contemplated, these infrastructure projects will create new employment opportunities. It's not, they will create sort of economic growth, and we've seen the growth numbers. I think I recently read in the Guyana's growth in its non-oil sector exceeds the growth of, the economies of the Caribbean, across the Caribbean. Yeah, so this spend will obviously, certainly the improved connectivity that Joel describes, that comes as a result of building these upgrading the roads and the bridges and the ports and the airports and other things, will enhance the connectivity with Guyana and neighboring countries. And, certainly an enhanced connection with Brazil makes a tremendous amount of sense. And certainly, so I think if you're sitting as someone who is thinking about Guyana's development, then certainly the infrastructure spend is something that is welcome, and certainly the challenge as I see it, and as some has been reported in the critique, and I think it's a legitimate critique has been reported, is in terms of the effective implementation of these infrastructure projects, efficient planning, budgeting, project management, etc. I was listening earlier in preparation to some of the discussion where, some of the interlocutors spoke about similar plans that had been in the 2023 budget, which have not yet been implemented. And so questioning kind of, how effective the spend is going to be. And so in that context, I think the consideration for us, and certainly for Joel and others, is to think through, what the transparency and accountability mechanisms might look like as we look through these spends to ensure that we actually get the bang for the buck that's being asked here. And one thing I would say, and one additional thing I would add, is we've seen some of this kind of bubble up in various ways, and I actually looked through to see what the funding looked like for the Environmental Protection Agency in this sort of broad new remit. And I certainly think that one of the challenges that we have to be concerned about is the environmental impact of the spend, and some careful considerations of broad mitigation strategies. So like Joel, I certainly agree that the highlight of the budget is the infrastructure spending. Guyana needs to spend in order to develop the kind of physical infrastructure that will help it to sustain its economic growth over an extended period of time. I certainly think the second bit that Joel mentioned, the education, I certainly think the education spend is also from my perspective, a highlight. We've seen spending on the construction, the school infrastructure, sort of building out schools, rehabilitation, maintenance of schools, education facilities, etc. We've seen part of the spend on teaching and learning resources. We've seen some of the spend on, sort of technical vocational education that's important. We've seen some of the spend on the increase with the cash grants one might argue about, again, the percentages that are associated with the increases, but they have been increases in this context. So we've seen those spends, and so certainly, I think, again, from the perspective of expectation, one can say that, look, the 2024 budget, in its intent, certainly in the spend that is reflected there, reflects a significant commitment to broadly education, the infrastructure for education, teachers, and other kinds of initiatives that are involved there. So there are issues which have emerged, and I'll pause here and give there are issues, so I'll pause on this one. There are issues which have emerged in the context of the education spend, the allocation to the University of Guyana, and the comparison of that allocation to the Guyana Online Academy of Learning, the GOLD program, and in some sense the almost equal nature of the spend, and that is certainly a point of criticism from, again, someone like me and others who might be looking from a distance and thinking that we really need to amplify the strengths of the university at this moment, and there's still some question about what this goal really, can this goal be an effective mechanism vis-a-vis the University of Guyana. So I'm going to pause there to certainly say that the expectations have certainly been set. Whether or not they have been met, that's a second question. But expectations have been set relative to these areas that Joel has identified: health, education, broadly the infrastructure, and we can drill down and argue about these various boxes. But certainly, I hope that answers your question.
Some say the budget is a measure of the success in Guyana, including oil revenue and everything else. Now, the Ministry of Education has received its largest amount, which is from the $1.141 trillion budget. The Ministry of Education got $135 billion, which is a vast increase. But some critics, including the opposition, said only $4 billion is going to the University of Guyana. Now, Dr. Blackman, as an educator, you think UG should have had more?
I certainly think this is one of the places where I certainly think that the University of Guyana should be getting more in this context, and certainly, I'm willing to listen to the arguments of those who have a different view in this context. But I think sitting where I am, as someone who is a part of the university and understands the role that the University of Guyana has played and continues to play in Guyana's development, I think it's clear that its funding, you've just noted, it's 130 billion, 135 billion or so. And so if you give the university the only tertiary level institution, or the premier tertiary level institution at this critical moment, just four, I think is probably not the wisest. It probably misses the mark. I think it's important to kind of see that, say, and I don't want to have, I don't want to get into this discussion of like being critical, but I would say this: the University of Guyana and the online academy are entities that are not functionally, operationally, historically, or institutionally comparable. And so we sort of need to focus on UG and what it does and what it needs to do better. At the same time, we need to, but it's clear that UG is an established institution, and so it should command a larger share of broadly the higher education pot. And I think we've had these issues emerge of the defense of the country, sea level crises. These are things that can't be put to an organization like GOAL. These are things that have to be generated organically from our own internal tertiary level institution. And so in that sense, I certainly think that, to answer your question directly, I think the answer is yes. More money ought to have gone. It certainly shouldn't be, 50-50. 75, 25, 80.
Okay, so can I add some important clarification to that? I think there's some missing information on that issue. May I?
Yes, certainly.
Go ahead.
The allocation in the budget for the University of Guyana is a subvention. That's the first thing. The University of Guyana right now, except when the budget is passed and gazetted, and then they start to implement in the phase manner free education. The first phase is writing off the students' debt. The University of Guyana is funded by the students. They have to pay. So the University of Guyana total funding as maybe a semi-autonomous institution is about $20 billion, in the region of $20 billion. So the $4 billion in the budget is a subvention. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I agree with the argument that we need to build up University of Ghana institutionally, and both of you are career academics, you're professors, so you know about higher education more than I do. I'm a student here, so the two of you. There's a lot of work in terms of University of Ghana, in terms of improving the quality, whether lecturers are publishing. I've never seen a publication from the University of Ghana. The kind of academic work that it needs, the output. That is a major concern, which the Vice President signaled the government is now, as university, it's going to make University of Ghana free eventually, fully, which means it's going to be fully funded by the National Treasury by 2025. Therefore, he has already signaled that they're going to focus on University of Ghana in that regard. The comparison to goal, I think the goal scholarship as it is a necessary intervention, not necessarily to displace University of Ghana, but to complement University of Ghana. Because if you look at the range of programs that one can access through the goal program, I don't think you do the gap analysis or the comparative analysis. I don't think University of Ghana currently offers all of those programs. And why this is so important, I was having this conversation with somebody a few days ago in the chat, why we didn't take the $40 billion. Because when I do the math, they were doing the same comparison. I divide the average cost for a master's degree is about $2 million or 10,000 US. So if you divide $4 billion by $2 million, you get 2,000. So the provision in the budget for the gold scholarship is to provide for 2,000 students, 2,000 persons. The target is 20,000. So multiply 20,000 by 20,000 by 2 million, you get maybe about $40 billion. So one person argue, oh well, we should take all this money and plug it into University of Ghana, right? But that will take time. There is an immediate need in the market. There's an immediate need to invest in 20,000, 30,000 of our people immediately, because it takes 2 years to get a master's, 4 years to get a bachelor's degree. You're talking about 4 and 2, 6 years that the labor market needs right now. So that is an immediate intervention to complement the University of Ghana, and it is an immediate need. So that is the missing information that I did not see surface in the public discourse until now, right? So the $4 billion is a subvention. It is not all the money that UG gets. UG's funding is about $20-odd billion a year.
Yeah, well, if I may, that's I mean, I want to be clear. I mean, it's all I'm saying from some distance is to say, look, for Guyana to maintain some international standards, or to try to get there, the national university must remain a central pillar. I'm saying goal is good in principle. But I concede the points that Joel just made, which is to say, there are gaps in the offerings that are available at the University of Guyana and the offerings that Guyanese would want to pursue in higher education, and so this definitely sort of allows for that sort of meeting of needs that cannot be met at the University of Guyana, and so I think that's entirely appropriate. It also points to sort of what is necessary in terms of how we upskill our people at this moment, and so I don't disagree with that at all. The place where I think the weakness resides is, and it's where the state policyholders have to be very thoughtful, is that I think in something like GOAL, what you'll find is that there are some weaknesses, curricular weaknesses, a sort of lack of guidance. So you have to think through, are students going to be able to effectively manage and take advantage of this opportunity in a cost-effective way? So, we don't want to end up with students minus the capacity, with degrees minus capacity to actually do the work. And so the key thing is to say, UG has work to do, as has been identified. They have to think through, and I'm glad you sort of noted on the subvention, and they have to think through about how they get different streams of money for doing different things. But let's assume that at some point they're going to be free. And so we have to think through, how do you get better qualified lecturers? How do they pay them better? You know, what's the long-term vision? So I want to be clear. I'm not saying that goal is bad. I'm saying, you know, I'm just trying to weigh the balance between the university, which I think has to be kind of the central pillar for the nation, so to speak, the national university, and this initiative, which is to complement the goings on of the national university. So just so that the perspective on my thinking is clear. So I'm sorry. I just want.
No, you're absolutely right. And what I'm saying is that the policymakers of the day have signaled that they are aware of the challenges and weaknesses, and they have signaled their intention to remedy it. So that is more or less a condition towards free education being funded directly from the Treasury. So I think we're heading in the right direction in that regard, based on the signals coming from the horse's mouth.
Now, let me turn to Guysuco. During the campaign, this government had promised to reopen the sugar estates that were shuttered by APNU, AFC government. So all eyes were on the sugar estates for the past 3 years. And as you all know, Rosal K Estate was reopened sometime last October. And the tonnage production target was 60,000 tons, I think. And I think they have surpassed that. So Guysuco is a corporation that not only employ people, but it has been maintaining communities across the country. Albion on quarantine, Rosal on the quarantine, Blaymont, West Coast Borbis, Iflat, West Coast Demerara. So the Ministry of Agriculture budget is about $97 billion, of which $6 billion going to Guysuco. Mr. Bagwandin, do you think that's enough for Guysuco? Some are saying Guysuco should have had more, others are saying should have had less. What do you think?
Well, I haven't looked at the annual reports of Guysuco for the longest while, but I have been studying the Guysuco case study since way back in 2017, so I'm familiar with the situation at hand. And the $6 billion, as far as my recollection goes, is consistent with the subvention over the last couple of years. It's been in the region of $5 billion, $4 billion, $6 billion every year. And I am not in a position to say whether it is enough, whether it is too much. I'm not in a position to say that. What I'm in a position to say, however, is in relation to this notion that putting money into Guysuco is like putting money in a black hole, according to critics and elements within the opposition, that is a flawed, the argument was always a flawed argument by the previous government to close the estates. In fact, the commission of inquiry that the last government did, which they used as the basis, and a key person on that commission of inquiry was Dr. Clive Thomas. I don't know if any of you ever read the report, but I have. In his report, he never recommended the closure of any estate. He never recommended the closure of any estate. Yet the government went and did everything contrary to the recommendations in that report. So the government, the former government, took $50 million of taxpayers' money. That's the cost of the commission of inquiry, which lasted for 3 months, disregarded all of the work of the commission of inquiry, and went ahead and did what they did. Today, the rest is history. But as you rightly pointed out, Guysuco as a corporation is not just an ordinary corporation because of its model, which has been maintained since the colonial days. The community, maintaining communities and drainage and irrigation and all of that. We don't put a cost to that. We don't put a cost to that in the community. Then it sustains the economy of the community, the economy of the villages. So the closure of the estate instantaneously took away, extracted about $40 billion from the economy. When you look at the multiplier effect, and if any of you ever came to Guyana and went into a sugar estate community where there is the market and all of the supplies of goods and services, all those people went out of, not directly involved in Guysuco, but they depend on the people working at Guysuco to come and spend in their business. Then you had private key and farmers who invested in private trucks and so on. All those people were affected. So you've taken away $40 billion of money that circulated in the economy. And that had a ripple effect. So that's the story with Guysuco in a nutshell. There is more, but I'm going to say that much for now.
Okay. Dr. Blackman, as you will know, there's not a single government in the world that does not subsidize agriculture. All countries subsidize agriculture. And Guysuco falls under the belt of agriculture. Now, they receive $6 billion. Some people are criticizing that. Others are saying we should not subsidize Guysuco because sugar is a failure and so forth. What do you think, Dr. Blackman? Should we continue to subsidize Guysuco?
Look, I want to start with the following. You know, as a child, I grew up in the regions, Alexander Village, in North and South Randveld, and so as a child, we played a lot in going into the cane fields.
Right.
So I want to say, I think you know, Joel gives part of the story there, but I want to offer a second part of the story and a different way to think about this question of Guysuco. Guyanese, we have produced sugar for almost 15 generations. You know, if my history serves me correct, I think we first cultivated sugar in about the 1650s. That's since then.
That's a bit accurate.
We've been doing sugar in Guyana, right? And we started doing them maybe in the 1700s, late 1700s or so. We started producing sugar commercially, And I remember writing about this. So what happened? This is Guyana comes to the commercial production of sugar somewhat later than the other Caribbean producers, and in this sense, we were able to, and this is the lesson that I want to kind of offer here. We were able to kind of import relatively advanced milling sugarcane equipment. And so because of this kind of advanced investment in the equipment for sugar, we were able to kind of really dominate. Guysuco then became sort of the largest cultivator producer of sugar. And, you know, at some point, you know, they were responsible for a decent chunk of Guyana's annual revenue and a decent chunk of its Guyana's agricultural production. So that's the setup. But the reality today is that sugar has declined by I mean, I think I remember writing some piece some point back, you know, if you look from, you know, 2000 to 2015, went down by, say, 150,000 metric tons, right? And the decline in production means that you had losses, the order of like $80 million in either 2014, 15, thereabouts, and continues perhaps to still lose money. So, and what these losses are doing is that they're necessitating large investments of injections of financial boards of government to maintain the organization's liquidity. That's the reality of Guysuco. And it's fundamentally the issue. Look, I have to say, this is something that I've thought a lot about. I've visited Wales. I've visited Ifluk. I've talked to the people there. I've gone all the way to Rose Hall when it was closed and took kids down there to see what was going on when it was closed and now they're open. So I'm very partial to the industry because I think that in a way, you know, you can't think of Guyana without, you know, you can't think of yourself Guyana without sugar estates. And the other reason that I think it's very important is because the sugar estates in some sense are the places where we house much of our industrial capacity. So at this moment, as we think about how to turn the corner industrially, this was the lesson. So this is why I did not agree on kind of just the mass closing of the estates and so on. But having said that, I could see the economic logic. I don't agree with the logic of closing them because there are lots of reasons for keeping them open because they provide an opportunity for us to pivot to the future. And I think that this is perhaps what I think that we have to be thinking about in terms of the sugar industry. No longer sugar, but I think this moment where we're thinking about our energy strategy or low carbon, and actually to pivot to the budget, I think this is one of the, if I were to say a disappointment from this context, is the quality, the cohesive quality of the budget. It should be guided by some broad sort of ideological strand. And I think in the context of our budget, we have a kind of broad philosophy that we're engaged in some sort of low carbon development strategy. And I think in that context, that's how one needs to be talking and seeing sort of Guysuco and the sugar industry. It's something that has to pivot to a source of renewable energy, bio-based materials, and that sort of sorry, as I explained there, I was sort of in the middle of doing some kinds of work that's related. But I think that that's where we need to go. And if I were to be critical, I would say that my criticism would be in not making a spend on innovative technologies to move the sugar industry away from just trying to recover something that's already gone to something that's different. And in this case, I would think, as you know, sort of like the experience of Brazil shows us, you know, sugarcane can go from being a single commodity resource to being something that is flexible, something that is diversified, something that is renewable. If I'm not mistaken, and I remember writing about this, Brazil generates about 7% of its electricity from sugarcane biomass. So that would be my criticism. It's not. I think Guysuco and sugarcane is critical to Guyana. It's critical to our psyche in some way. I think it was bad economic policy to, in spite of the fact that these estates were losing money, I think the multiplier effects of various communities severely impacted by just simply closing them down without a plan for what people are going to be doing. And I think the current government now has an opportunity not just to think about reopening to make sugar, but to reopen to think, to re-envision what it is that we're doing in that space. And that would be my difference with Joel in this context. And
no, it's not a different. I agree with you. I mean, what the government is doing now, I mean, this is not an official policy that they have stated, but I can deduce that what they're doing now, that is not the end. They certainly need to deal with Guysuco, address Guysuco in that manner as you have outlined. But right now, their main focus is on all the bigger projects. So they're doing just enough to increase the productivity, to keep it going. And then I think the next wave, Guysuco will be properly dealt with. That is my thought on it. So we're on the same page, Doc. We're on the same page. I certainly agree with you.
Someone just texted me to tell me that it was wrong to close the sugar factories, that what APNU did, but at the same time, governments past and present must be blamed because it did not modernize the sugar factory over the years, causing sugar production to be far more than the world market prices. Anyway, well, that's just a text.
There's a history to that. I don't want to dominate the conversation on Guysuco, but there is an answer to that. There is an explanation for that. I don't know if you want me to try my best to summarize it, but it has to do. Should I proceed?
No, I think you should.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Because I think we're dominating. We move away from budget to Guysuco. But listen, the vice president in two press conferences ago, he spoke about Skeldon and the role of Booker Tate, and the history of Booker Tate came back. And incidentally, myself and another professor was involved in actually studying the Skeldon case. And when Desmond Hoyt, the late Desmond Hoyt, took over from Burnham, and we took over Guysuco from Booker Tate's, he realized that we did not have the capacity and the managerial competency to manage Guysuco. So he approached Booker Tate to come back, and that manifested into an agreement with Booker Tate in the 90s to help us to manage Guysuco. So all this while, Booker Tate was involved in providing management services for Guysuco. Now, Booker Tate, there was a rumor that they wanted to take over back Guysuco. And that time, Cherry was the president. They went to Cherry. The rumor became a reality because they actually approached the then government, the late Cherry, and he refused. And since then, the view is that Booker Tate would have deliberately destroyed Guysuco from then, because the relationship, I'm trying to summarize the story, the relationship between Guysuco and by extension the government and Booker Tate from then started to deteriorate. Well, the real deterioration started with Skeldon, because they were involved. It was a study that they commissioned. They did a feasibility study, which from that study, they recommended to move production towards the east because of the soil fertility, because they wanted to get a higher yield per acre in terms of output. And that is how Skeldon was birthed. They did all of the studies, they did all of the design, they were contracted separately to supervise and manage that project. The project was administered like a classic textbook style of administration, project management and everything. And they signed off, they were supposed to quality assure the project. And they never did. They failed to deliver on their contractual obligation. The government then took them to court to sue them for the failure of Skeldon. And by then it was 2015, there was a change of government, and the government that came in 2015, all of a sudden, there was no appeal, the case was withdrawn, and the rest is history. The amount of money that the government was suing Booker Tate for Skeldon and what happened there, at that time was about 4.5 billion thereabout. If you present value that to today, it's about $7 billion. So that's a summary. In a couple of days, we did a paper on it, we'll publish it. So that'll be out in the public domain.
Okay. Our listeners are very, very wise. Most of them, I think. One of them sent me a text to ask you all this question. And it's, they said that the budget is not a working class budget. I don't understand what's a working class budget. But anyhow, because it did not address wages and salaries and the cost of living impact on the people. Dr. Blackwell, let me go to you first. What would you tell this listener?
No, I think I have to parse my words carefully here. If you ask, so first we should look at the elements of the budget that go to some of these issues. And so I did some, I did some research in sort of the in preparation, and so what we find is, there are some very specific things that are related to the NIS, sort of NIS benefits. There are things that are related to survivor benefits. I certainly think that the questions of, and this is a very important question. So, and I'll point out why. So, there have been tangible increases. I won't say tangible. There have been increases in things related to the National Insurance Scheme. And one can go and look through and see the details of, something moves from 17 to 19 for the vulnerable populations, folks who are collecting some kind of social welfare. There are survivor benefit increases, and there are other increases that are there. Now, certainly, and I think this is something that is often not kind of thought about in the sense, is that they are, these infrastructure projects, the benefits of these projects should, hospitals, education, etc., should redound to people who are faced with challenges. So now, having said that, I would be remiss to say, I'm a part of a number of organizations that are involved in Questions Guyana, and it is clear that one central message that has been coming through over the course of the last, 12, 18 months, have been questions about the cost of living and the ability to mitigate some aspects of the cost of living. I mean, so we can see also issues like, the raising of the tax threshold from something to about $100,000 over other elements which go to producing disposable. So there are a number of them in there, which go to kind of creating more disposable income for individuals. The question is it enough? Does it really address the question of the cost of living increases that many people have been talking about? It costs so much for a slice of pumpkin. It costs so much for various things and so on. And I don't think that there has been if I were to read the logic of the budget, and I took down this PDF file of how many pages, read the outline, read a good chunk of it. If I were to read the logic of the budget, it is clear that I think the government of the day is making a decision to say, we're gonna bet on the infrastructure and creating the climate that is necessary, and trust that we will have the economic growth that will drive and lift all boats. Now, is this strategy going to work? It's not clear to me. But I too would caution. I would caution your viewers. The biggest, so in the official document, and actually this is one of the technical things that I wanted to raise with Joel. In the official kind of narrative of the budget, inflation is pegged at about 2%, but it's clearly not 2%. So, one should probably argue some about the validity of the figure. It's clear that there are inflationary trends in the Guyanese economy, which is sort of minimizing the cost, minimizing the actual value of the dollar that people have in their hands. Now you have this question, and I think this is the question that your audience is. We've talked about the huge spend in the infrastructure side of things. So that is also a potentially inflationary spend. Now, so I think you have to figure out some ways to constrain the amount of. I'm speaking from an objective perspective. I still think you have to find ways to, as you attempt to meet this cost of living challenge, that you can't just simply flood it with money, because what you will end up with is the cost of these goods and services just kind of growing to meet the money that's available to spend for it. And so it's, in a sense, what you want is real increases in purchasing power. And this is where I think we have to have a think. And I'll pause, let Joel speak from the perspective, he's closer to it than I am. And then I'll have some thoughts. I want to add a few more thoughts on this particular topic around the cost of living, because I spent a bit of time thinking about it.
Joe, before I speak on this, I got another text here. Someone asked what a tax threshold is all about. $100,000. This means that you don't pay taxes if you earn $100,000 and less. Yes. But the person is asking the question, if you earn $250,000, would you pay taxes only on the balance of $150,000, or you pay taxes the whole $250,000?
No, you pay it on the balance. You gotta deduct the tax-free income, and then you apply the tax on the difference. Yeah. You do the calculation on the difference.
Okay.
So 100,000 is tax-free, so we're not calculating. So you only calculate on the 150.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the budget, according to Vice President Jagdeo, did not add any new taxes, and it is meant to advance the lives of the citizens. This is according to the Minister of Finance, Senior Minister of Finance, Ashley Singh. But others say it has failed in that respect because it focused too much on infrastructure and other gadgets that has nothing to do with the human survival in Guyana. Mr. Bagwenden, can you comment on that?
You know, when you look at China, how China was able to achieve where it is today, China has had and continues to have the highest labor force participation rate of 70%. And one who studies China success story, you would learn that China's success story is not only a function of the government, but it was a function of the people and the government. The government did its part and the people did their part in terms of working hard. Now I say this to juxtapose or to establish the framework of my response to the question. Let's speak to the cost of living first. Many persons are arguing that, and even a chartered accountant, Raman McCray, in their budget focus, say that the measures in the budget for cost of living are inadequate. But I don't know what is inadequate. What do you mean by inadequate? So let me quantify the measures. People are taking only this $7 billion allocation in the budget. That $7 billion allocation in the budget is not the only measure. One who understands and studies and analyzes the budget properly and look at the measures that were implemented from 2020 to now, you got to look from the first budget of the government of the day, which is from 2020, since they resumed office. It amounts to, with the expanded measures in 2024, based on my calculation, $300 billion. Now I'll explain how we get $300 billion. Raman McCray, for example, argued, and the opposition argued, or they questioned rather, the 2% inflation for 2023 is questionable. It can't be 2%. How do you think we arrive at 2%? The inflation in 2022 was 7%, came down to 2%. Now here how we achieve 2%. The average global inflation rate is about 7%, 8.7% in 2022. 2023, it probably came down to about 6%. Some countries are having inflation rate in the 100% region, 160%, 300%. And the mistake of Raman McCray and other commentators is to conflate inflation with cost of living. Inflation and cost of living is two different things, even though they're related, because they measure two different baskets of goods and services. Having said that, Where did I get this $300 billion from for cost of living? When the government came into resume office in 2020, the first menu of measures, they reversed all the 200 plus taxes to pre-2015 rates. Where did we get these 200 taxes from? The former government introduced VAT on items, hundreds of items that never attracted VAT before, that were zero rated. They've increased fees for things like licenses and so on, and even the donkey card by 300%. They've increased fees for lease, for agricultural land. There were court cases and all of that. The taxes, the additional taxes, those measures amounted to, that they collected in taxes, was over $60 billion. So that means the reversal of those measures immediately restored $60 billion in disposable income at the household level. That's the first thing, that's the first measure, which were maintained. Then fuel prices went up, double-edged sword. Government reduced the excise tax on fuel from 50% down to 0%. In the pre-pandemic period, our fuel import bill stood at $100 billion. And at $100 billion, the government collected annually $20 billion in excise taxes. Today, as of 2023, the fuel import bill is double to $200 billion, which means we would have collected $40 billion in excise taxes. They've given up that. That's foregone revenue. That is a cost to the national treasury. That's 60 and 40, that's $100 billion. Electricity rates did not increase. GPL also incur higher generating costs because we're still using fuel to generate electricity. And so the cost as a result of high prices went up by $20 billion more. That's another subsidized cost. That's $120 billion. Same thing for the water rates. The shipping freight, another $6 billion to calculate shipping, the cost of freight to apply the duty on the pre-pandemic rates, because if you apply it on the current rates, it's 500% higher than pre-pandemic level. And so all of that, those are some examples of key fiscal measures in addition to all the other measures to increase disposable income and the part-time jobs, etc. You add it up annually in terms of cost to the national treasury, in terms of how much revenue the government given up, is $300 billion. That is 110% of the amount of money flowing to the budget this year from the Natural Resources Fund. Now, what does that mean? That is $300 billion in subsidized cost to the household level, subsidized household expenditure, because it means, because of those measures, when you go to the fuel pump, you don't have to pay increased cost. The fuel is subsidized. Your electricity bill is subsidized. Your water bill is subsidized. Subsidizing fuel costs means you're also subsidizing a range of other services, such as transportation. The cost of the goods moving from the port through logistics to the supermarket shelf is subsidized to the tune of $300 billion. That works out to $1.5 million per household a year in a subsidy, indirectly. So that is what the measure amounted to, which is about 24% of the budget. So when you say, oh, it is inadequate, what is inadequate? What is the number? And that is how we were able to attain to tame our inflation rate to 2% because of the measures, Now, what is the long-term approach to deal with this? The long-term approach, prices for commodities is a function of the market-driven economy. It is a function of demand and supply. If you have a short supply of commodity, or if you're not producing that commodity here and we got to import it from international markets, and there are external factors in international markets, and prices went up, then you call that imported inflation. We can't control that, but we can control if we're producing everything that we need to produce the final commodity that goes into the pot. then we could control that. So self-sufficiency. So this is why the investment in agriculture, food security, self-sufficiency in some areas, investing in the infrastructure, the farm to market roads, so that we could build out the productive capacity and transition the economy from a primary producing economy, so we don't have to produce plantain and import packaged plantain from Trinidad. You understand? So that we could drive industrialization, we could drive the manufacturing sector. That's why the gas to shore is important. So when you build out the productive capacity, you invest in the framework to build out the productive capacity. That is how in the long term, and you have energy security and food security, that is how in the long term you'd be able to have some better degree of control of food prices, of prices in general, to achieve equilibrium. If we don't make those investments, then we're going to forever have to find ways to pump money into people, which would not be sustainable. It's a recipe for bankruptcy because you're going to still have inflation. So that is how the inflation and cost of living is being confronted. Now, is the budget a working class budget? Now, I'm happy that Dr. Blackman is here because Dr. Blackman is a mathematician. Now, all that we have said, and Dr. Blackman speak to it, so I'm not going to regurgitate what he said about in terms of wages and so on, or working class, better wages. But again, there are many arguments that we can advance. But one of the arguments is, and which is a reality of what is taking place today, is that wages and salaries is a function of the market. Before oil, when we did not have international companies here competing for local talent, which we have very few of, companies pay you next, they pay you whatever they want to pay you. Now, according to the World Bank, the poverty line is $5 a day. $5 a day, that's $1,000 a day. That's the poverty line by World Bank standard. That's $30,000 a month. 17 years ago, my first job offer was an audit clerk in DDL, and the salary as an audit clerk then was $30,000. There is no company that pays $30,000 anymore. The janitor, the laborer, the unskilled laborer works for $8,000 a day. The janitor makes about $70,000 to $80,000 a day. By World Bank poverty metric, they're above the poverty line based on that standard. Let's talk about, so income is going to improve as a function of the market and international companies competing for talented human resources, doubling, tripling wages and salaries. That's a function of the market. That is why we have to invest in our people to upskill so that they could benefit from higher paying jobs in the market that the economy is providing. Now, having said that, let's now talk of whether the budget has achieved its general, broad, overarching objective over the years, and given that this government has been in...
Let me stop you. I'll come to that later on as time runs by. Let me ask Dr. Blackman this. Agriculture, according to our listeners, and these days I don't have to even prepare questions because our listeners have sent me all the questions, have been the backbone of this country from the date of birth of this country, going back to thousands of years, according to this guy, but let's say 100 of years. He said oil is there now, but it's going to be gone. Gold is there, it's going to be gone, but agriculture stays forever. And he believes that there should be more subsidy to help rice farmers and cash crop growers and so forth. Dr. Blackman, what do you think? Do you support this type of argument?
No, I absolutely do. Some years ago, this question was put to me, and I sort of said the future of Guyana is in agriculture. And I think the oil is a finite resource. We know that by 2050 or so, that this thing will start to be on the downslope, and so it's clear, and it's clear that what we have to do is we have to figure out how to position ourselves to use the windfall to get to a place of stability. And this will come to something which I hope maybe we will have a word about the resource fund and its contributions to the budget and some of the challenges therein. So I think your listener is correct. the one thing I wanted, and I don't want to take this down in the wrong way. I wanted to raise for Joel this question that he just, as I prepared for, I noted in there's been a slightly sort of contradictory narrative around the drivers of inflation in Guyana, and I think it's something for us to technically tease out, because it will better help to address this question that we've stumbled on about the cost of living, and to better able to manage what happens. So in the budget speech, coming to agriculture, the speech explains that the increased local food production explains much of the lower inflation rate in 2023, that is the 2%. But it then makes the case that inflation is largely determined by sort of global events. And so you can't have both of them. And so I think one of the things we have to parse out, and this is really key to understanding and getting a better feel for a more concrete and objective feel for what's happening with this cost of living thing, is to sort of say, well, really, what are the key factors that explain the Guyanese 2% inflation rate? How do we? Okay, so maybe you want, so so the point I wanted to put to Joel is maybe looking from a distance, the question is, well, how plausible is this number? Also, given the significant increase in government expenditure in 2023, and now this, and so this is why I want your cost of living guy, Dr. Rose, to understand that there's a little technical problem here that we have to solve, and it's not just solved by throwing a big bag of money into the society in terms of wages and salaries, etc. And so I'll give Joel a chance to kind of give his thought on the 2%, and then I want to come back if you will allow.
The drivers of inflation, the drivers are actually both. So let me explain how it works. When the minister speaks of food production and agriculture, certainly yes, for things like cash crop, and if you're using organic fertilizer and so on, you don't need to import organic fertilizer. And if you're increasing production in that regard, if you're increasing production in the other new commodities, the new agricultural products that we're now planting, which would bring such as soya, which would bring self-sufficiency in other areas, that is understandable. But that is only in one component. There's still, across all these sectors, there's still many items that we import. Hence, we are susceptible to external factors, hence the term imported inflation. So for example, Banks DIH. Banks DIH is a manufacturing entity here in Guyana that produces beverages, but they do not produce the input goods, the input raw materials rather. They still have to import most of the raw material. They refine, they have to, the sugar that they use, they can't use the sugar that we produce. They have to use the white sugar, the refined sugar. They have to import that. So the input materials, the raw materials to produce goods here, we are susceptible to external factors, hence imported inflation. And home here, while we're looking to ramp up production so that we could reach to equilibrium prices, because of what is happening, we have visitors coming to Guyana that exceeded our population, as was reported recently. That is driving aggregate demand. So there are many factors driving inflation. There's the imported inflation, and then there is aggregate demand here, because more people coming, people right here are earning more because they're getting better paid jobs, so their disposable incomes increase. Budgetary measures aid in increasing disposable income at the aggregate level. Then we have visitors coming, so the spending power, the aggregate spending power in the economy is driving aggregate demand, and hence that is driving inflation. So this is why all the measures implemented, and including the investment in the economy to build out the productive sector, are important.
No, yeah, thanks. One of the other things, I mean, I'm just going to, I mean, I suppose that thinking about this, and you want to see is a little disaggregation, I think, between sort of like tradable non-tradable inflation rates. So like more transparency about the weights of the items that compose the consumer basket, so that you really get a better, so that both you and the opposition can talk about inflation in the same way. As I think what this is where the question from the audience came, is that we have these narratives about cost of living, and all of them seem to be using their own basket to kind of measure what this cost of living is.
Yeah, but remember, like I said earlier, cost of living is a different index versus inflation. Inflation index is measured by the consumer price index, which is urban prices. Cost of living is something totally different, which we do not have an index in Guyana. We do not have a cost of living index. So the conversation gets conflated with inflation.
It's a proxy for
cost of living, right? But I just wanted the viewers to understand that technicality.
Yeah, it's a proxy for that conversation. Yeah. You know, Dr. Rose, Doctor, we took over, we kind of went on our own tangent. Dr. Rose?
Okay, now explain to me why you're saying that there's no cost of living index. There is one, but explain to me how it's different.
Well, I am not aware that there is one. I'm not aware. Could you point me to that? It's different because cost of living measures a broader.
It's measured by the PPI. Anyway, I don't want to get into that technicality. It's cost of living.
We have a PPI. We have one for Guyana.
Every country has one.
Well, I'm not aware of the who
okay.
runs the IMF. The bank.
Pardon me?
What are you talking about? Purchasing PPP?
Purchasing power index.
Well, that's a different thing. That's a different that.
But that's the measure cost of living, though. Anyway,
that's different. That is purchasing power parties to measure cost of living across different countries to compare, and that measure of itself has many other flaws.
But it's measured internally too. But I have a good question from one of my listeners here, and she wants a specific answer. I don't know who the person is, no name. Can you tell this listener how this budget will improve her living standards? Says she's considered a poor person based on her wages. What this budget will do so that she can use her same wages to buy more groceries and to live much happier. What the budget has in it for her?
No,
I can't give you an answer because you need more information, such as, if you really want me to answer that, I would ask, okay, does she have dependents? How old is she? What work is she doing? Where is she living? Where is she residing? Does she have, what resources?
She says she's earning about $100,000 a month. That's all this information she gave.
No, I don't want to know what she's earning. What is her profession? Is she a domestic worker? Is she a clerk in a bank?
Well, 100,000, it got to be anything, security, domestic worker. I don't know what that is.
No. You see, we can come up with all. This is a real person asking a question for direction. There are millions of examples. I could use myself as an example. 17 years ago, my first job, I was working for $50,000. How did I reach to where I am today? I invested in myself. I invested in education. My income I was supported. I come from a poor family. I didn't come from a rich family.
No, but she's asking how this budget will help her. If you don't know,
that is why I'm asking what is she, her age, etc. Because the budget has, let me tell you what the budget has. If she's a resourceful person, she can get some assistance. She wants to supplement her income. She wants to multiply her income. She can go to the Small Business Bureau, submit a business plan, get a grant to start a business venture. That would bring in an income. That is one aspect in there. Then there is the grant and there is loans to supplement that. That is creating another source of sustainable income. If she's somebody that is resourceful, who has an idea, that is something I could point her to that is in the budget. That's one example.
No, I certainly think, Joel is right.
The investment in healthcare and in health infrastructure, that is for her. She's earning $100,000 as she disclosed. She doesn't have to pay for free. She doesn't have to pay for healthcare. That is important. She has children, education, investment in education, that is for her to benefit from. So what does she want to do? The question she has to ask herself, or we have to pose to her, what do you do? How could we assist you? Or how could you benefit from the resources that are made available? What do you need to do to access it? There are many things that are available. She may need guidance how to access it.
Okay. Now, Dr. Blackman, let me ask you this question. We just got about 12 minutes to go. What's your overall view of the budget?
So as I mentioned at the beginning, I think that Joel is right there. He mentioned some of these things, which reduction in freight charges, expansion of part-time jobs programs. He just talked about the small and medium-sized business, increases in old age pension. So there are lots of things, but it feels it feels as if it's a pragmatic budget. It's not an ideological, cohesive budget. It feels like we're just doing these little things we're plugging holes in various places, but it's not a sense of, here is what we're doing in the near term, here is what we're doing in the medium term, here's where we're going in the long term, because we're working on this overarching vision of, as I said before, the low carbon strategy, let's say. So in my deep criticism, I would say, there are lots of proposed measures here that I certainly agree with. We can argue about whether or not increasing the old age pension from $33,000 per month to $36,000 per month, whether that's enough. We can argue whether public assistance increased from $16,000 per month to $19,000 per month, whether the $3,000 is enough, and what the impact that will have on a particular life. But we can't argue that it is an increase. And so it definitely points in the right direction. What I think is missing, at least from my perspective, is the sense of, like, there is this overarching thing that we're engaged in. We're broadly engaged in using this, at least from my perspective, I always think the low carbon development strategy is something that says we're going to take this windfall and we're going to figure out how to turn around and get ourselves to a renewable, sustainable Guyana, a renewable, sustainable green Guyana. So you're looking for places of, are we thinking about electric cars? So this future orientation and not just plugging the holes of today. And this is why I'm also saying that the kind of argument that we're having about a consumer price index, a cost of living index, and so on, is a very important one, because what it does is it uses up our energy as Guyanese and distracts us from a larger vision about where we want to go with some finite, it's certainly good money, but it's finite money. It's not forever money. And so we have to be able to get to the other part of the platform. And these budgets are documents that allow us to get there. And I think if you were to ask me, what would be one thing I would do, I think I would have emphasized more this question of the low carbon development strategy as my underpinning. And this is where I'm going. And this is where we are today in 2024 on this road to where I expect us to get at some point, 2030, I think the last iteration of the low carbon development paper was low carbon development for 2030 or something of that sort, if I remember correctly what I read. So that would be my biggest criticism. Yeah. And I want to say one other thing before, because I know the time. So I wanted to, as I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, I think this question, this cost of living question, is important. And it's a question of everyone is sitting. So I saw in some places someone said, and I certainly think that there are places for a universal basic income and how you ought to do it. But I also want to say, to caution, that affecting a universal basic income scheme within the context of Guyana, within the context of some of the ethnic channels and racial challenges that we have, not going to be something that's easy. And so one of the things I think we have to think about is that Guyana has a relatively young population. So the population skews to the youth. And so governments have a bit of time. And so part of what I was thinking that, maybe you don't need a universal basic income scheme where you're just injecting more money in a liquid sense into the economy, because that then, in a sense, uses up the money, and the value that you get for that money is not there. And so you wanted to have some kind of thing that looked like savings. And I thought that one thing I wanted to add, and this could have been something that one could see in the budget, a savings pot, which is directed at some of these social issues, something like accounts for children that are born today. And so there's an account that you get access to when you get to 21, in which the government deposits a certain amount of money every year in that account for every child that is born. See, that way you avoid some of the backward-looking challenges that we have about race, about ethnicity, and start to look more forward-looking about investing in the children in some. And it's not completely crazy, because in a sense you're already doing this with the child school voucher program, so to speak, but you're doing it again in a manner that I think creates an opportunity for challenge. So I think something where you digitize and you begin to put families understand that for every one of their children there's an account that they will have access to, and families are relatively young, so they will grow to see their children have access to that. And so there's money in some tangible sense, but it's not sitting kind of creating a more difficult challenge internally. So that's a thought. And I had one more, but I'll pause and give Joel a chance to give. Maybe he wants to respond to
just under 2 minutes to address this issue.
Yeah.
Joel.
Yeah.
You have 2 minutes to address. What's your view of the overall view of the budget?
Well, before I get, we're wrapping up now?
Yeah.
All right.
You just have 2 minutes.
Well, let me take
Less
the
than
2 minutes. Let me take the 2 minutes to give another response to the person who asked the question. Income is relative. Your capacity to increase your earnings is relative to your competencies and your skills. There is provision in the budget to benefit from the training programs that the government is providing to upskill, as well as the scholarship programs, free education. That's the first thing. If she wants to sustainably increase her income, education, upskill, prepare for the future job market, because if she stays in the same way at the same skill level, still the same competence level, it is unlikely that income is going to grow, right? So it's relative. Always remember that it's relative. Overall, the budget is framed within a broader overarching framework that is a development strategy. That development strategy is, as Dr. Blackman alluded to, the low carbon development strategy, as well as the government's manifesto, which draws from historical development strategies that I have alluded to as well that were not fully implemented. For example, the 1996 development strategy. That is the broad framework. And if we understand and we take the time to study these documents and understand and to be able to craft a vision of where we need to be, I believe one would appreciate the consistency and the continuity in the budget in terms of its allocation and its measures, as well as addressing current situation, current context, current events.
Okay. On a grade from 1 to 10, Mr. Bagwan did, how would you rate the budget? 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest.
I really don't like the grading system because it could be subjective. I don't want to place myself in a subjective position. I think qualitatively, I've given my views on the budget. I'm going to stay away from the quantitative element.
Dr. Blackman, you grade papers, you grade exams like me. And from A to F, what grade would you give the budget?
No, I think, you know, since I am a grader and I have to give a grade, I would give the budget a grade of B. I think a B is a solid grade for this budget. You know, it definitely you know, addresses a number of the issues. I think you can't say that it doesn't. What we can argue about is whether or not the issue has been addressed in the way that you think it ought to be addressed. And that's a source of conversation between the policymakers. It's in the context of Guyana. Like I said, my broad sense is that I think, and Joel sort of alluded to this, that I feel that one should feel more fidelity to the plan, to the broad plan. He suggests that these are elements of the manifesto combined with the low carbon development strategy. You know, I think a grade of B is a good grade for the budget.
And since you're on your closing remarks, you have 30 seconds.
No, I think that look, Guyana is a challenging place. Budget is about the values. You know, we have political actors who have, you know, sort of slightly different ideological mindsets from which they come. What I think is real important, and I would offer this as a kind of thought to this question of the cost of living as it's come up is something that I think has to be addressed, because it will leave the thing in a fracture. And the only way that you're going to address it in an effective manner in the Guyanese context is that all of the people who are part of the stakeholders in the debate have to agree on some broad measure of some broad, credible measure of what it means to think about some cost of living index for Guyana. And until you have something like that, you will just have two groups of people sort of screaming at each other from one side, saying how things are different. But the question of place for some agreement on the measures that we're using to describe the reality among us. And I certainly think that that's something that I hope, you know, certainly Joel can begin to work on. And
okay, Joel, your closing remarks, 25 seconds.
The budget, as the theme it was presented under, staying the course, does exactly that. All the projects that the government commenced from 2021, 2022, 2023, all the roads, the gas plant, the bridge, they are not completed. These are multi-year projects. And so they need to continue to make provisions in the budget so that they could be realized, and so that the citizens, the people could start to cash in on the benefit, draw down on the benefit that these developments would accrue. So those are my closing remarks.
Okay. I must thank both of you for this very program to enlighten the people. I think it was a very, very good debate on the budget. You guys did an excellent job, and I will give both of you an A.
You're an easy
A grade in telling the nation or dissecting the budget, so to speak. Before we go, I want to say this. I think, as I always said every week, the retirement age should be increased from 55 to 62, because at age 55, people are experienced and they're qualified and they're leaving the country in droves. As soon as they retire, they're gone overseas to give their talented expertise to other countries. Also, the internet system, it has to work better than the way it's working. We should improve the internet system as well. And another thing I want to say to all public servants, please treat the public as their servants, and not as their bosses, because I've been having all these complaints. Next week, I'll make an announcement of a complaint about a police officer at Wim Police Station. I'll do it next week, not this week, and his behavior. So I'm asking all public servants, teachers, nurses, public servants, civil servants, please treat the public with respect. Please, please do that. Now, I want all the audience to know that I'm broadcasting from Sleeping Hotel. It's one of the best hotels in Georgia. It's in a central location on Church and Albert Street. You can't ask for better. The rooms are spacious, a swimming pool, a bar, a restaurant. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic hotel to be at. And I will give it to, well, I will not rate it because the last time I rated this hotel, a lot of people came down on me and said, I don't know what rating hotels. But it's one of the best places you can come to and enjoy yourself. It's very, very quiet. It's nice and it's beautiful. Thank you all for coming. I must thank Noir Singh again for making this program available. Devin Bissoon and Ryan Gobin, thank you guys as the technical producers and the entire staff of Globespan Television. Thank you all very much. Dr. Blackman, thank you for coming on such a short notice. Joel, also, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you all tonight, and it was a very, very good program. But we will hear from our listeners of the rating we got from this program tonight. Thank you all very much again.
Thank you.